All right, so welcome back. So today we're going to be making it so that when we actually bring up our inventory screen, it's going to know what's in the player's inventory. So we're going to make a scriptable object for our general player inventory. It's going to have a list, and in this case just has that one item we've made so far, the soldier sword, which I gave for some reason the Arrow Sprite. I'll have to change that. But if I hit play here, you'll see that a few things happen. First, the item description text goes away, and I get one item that gets created in here, and it acts like a button. If I press it, it reacts. Next time, we're going to actually add the being able to use it if it's a usable item and getting the description down here. But this is what we're doing today, so let's jump right in. Okay, so welcome back. I'm trying something new here. I'm not using my laptop for this, which means that I have all of this screen real estate. It's crazy working on my desktop computer, which means that the resolution should be better. Hopefully, I'm trying to record this in 1920 by 1080, so it should be HD. So that's something. And then on top of that, let me know if you guys have trouble seeing anything off to the side here. When we get into actually scripting stuff, I'll make sure to embiggen everything so that it's nice and legible. But if you have any trouble reading anything, like in the inspector hierarchy or in the project window, please let me know. So today we're going to continue with a new script for that inventory slot where we left off. So in my prefabs here, the last thing I did was I made an inventory UI and a prefab for the inventory slot. And this is essentially just an image. Weird. Okay, it's essentially just an image that has, as part of it, an image for the inventory and an image for the number held. And then, for some reason, it's reading it strangely inside of the prefab, but that doesn't matter. So we've got the inventory image and the number held. Now, because the number held was created using TextMesh Pro, we need to keep that into account whenever we're trying to change or address that using a script. Because we're not going to be able to use just the normal Unity UI, we need to make sure that we're using TextMesh Pro. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to go into my scripts folder. And what I want to do is I want to be able to have two new scripts here. So under scripts, I'm going to go into inventory. I've got the inventory item script, which is going to have the information. So the name, the description, the image that we have for it, however many of them that we're currently holding, whether or not it's usable and whether or not it's unique. Now I'm going to create a few more scripts here, and we're going to be addressing these over the next video or two. So I'm going to go to Create C# script. I'm going to call this one Inventory Slot. I'm going to create another one, C# script, that I'm going to call Inventory Manager. And the inventory slot is going to be the script that's attached to each individual button item in the inventory, whereas the inventory manager will be attached to the did I put in the pause canvas? Yeah, I did. Will be attached to the actual inventory panel so that we have all of these kind of separate from one another. So I'm going to open these up into Visual Studio, and I haven't opened Visual Studio yet today, so this is going to take a minute. I'll meet you back here in just a moment. Okay, so here we are with our two new scripts, our inventory slot and our inventory manager. And let me actually embiggen this just a little bit. Control Shift. Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting. Do I have it like maxed out or something? Oh no, okay. I am not using my Mac, so I'm using a different version of Visual Studio. So give me a second, I just need to find out what the edit. I want to change the text size. Okay, here we go. That was weird. So on Windows, it's Control mouse wheel, which is very strange to me. I spent so much time with my laptop. Coming back to do stuff on my PC is weird. Okay, anyway, this should be pretty big here. So since we're using TextMesh Pro, what we have to do is make sure that in both of these, I'm going to add the using statement, TM Pro, to use the TextMesh Pro API. So I'm going to add using TM Pro to both of them. Now in my inventory slot here, what I want to do is I want to start setting up references to the item that this slot is representing and the slot itself, the things on that need to be changed. So for example, I'm also going to be doing this not using public. It was pointed out to me many times that I shouldn't be using public as often as I am. So instead, I'm going to be using something called a serialized field. In general, you want your variables or objects to be as sequestered as they possibly can be. So you only want them to be public if they absolutely need to be public. So in this case, I don't need them to be public to be both read and set. I only need them to be public so that I could assign them from the editor. So rather than making them public, I'm going to use one of Unity's attributes, which this one that we're going to use is the serialized field. So serialized field, and then this is going to be a private, and I'm going to have this reference, let's start with the number text. So we'll call this, oh yeah, and then, so you need to have the using statement to use TextMesh Pro, and then to address one of those TextMesh Pro objects, we need to have it be a TextMesh Pro UGUI, UGUI. And I'm going to call this, call it item name text, so that I'm not getting the name itself, but the text that I want to change. And let's see, I guess I don't have an actual name. The inventory slot isn't going to be changing the description, but it does need to hold the description, and it does need to know what the item it's holding. I think that, no, one more thing. Serialized field. This needs to be a private image, and it's not going to like this until I add the using unity.ui. Unity engine.ui. And then it'll like the image. This is the image that we're actually going to change, and I'll call this item image. All right, so in keeping with our attributes here, I'm going to add another one up here, which is a header. And this header is going to work just to describe to myself and anybody else what these are for. So these are going to be UI, forgot my quotations. So this is going to be UI stuff to change. And then down here, I'll make another header. And this is going to be for variables from the item. Man, I cannot spell today. Okay, so first I need to know what the item sprite is. So I'm going to make this I'm going to make it public because I want to be able to set this from the manager. So I'm going to make this a public sprite, item sprite, and then I'll use the item sprite to change what the image is. I'm going to make a public int number held, which is what I'll use to change the, I guess it's not item name text, it's item number text. And then, so I have the number held. I need to keep the description, which is a string. Now the reason I'm making these public instead of serialized fields is because these are going to be set through the inventory manager. So the inventory manager needs to have the access to not only see what they are, get the value, but also to change what they are, set the value. So since this needs to be both getting and setting, these need to be fully public and not just a serialized field, if that makes any sense. It's weird for me to start adding this far into the project, but I think quite a few people joined me at the beginning of the inventory stuff, so this is as good a time to talk about it as any. Okay, I also need to know what item it is. So this is going to be a public inventory item that I'm going to call this item. And I need to know what the inventory manager is. So public inventory manager, we'll call it this manager. Okay, so now the slot needs to know what the manager is and what info to give the manager. For example, a description. So let's go back to Unity here so I can actually explain this. Let's turn on our inventory panel. So when we actually click on an item, the manager controls this whole panel. So when we click on an item, the slot is going to send information to the manager for what to put here and whether or not this button should be active. And then when you click on another one, it'll reset it again. So the slot itself just needs to have the image, how many of the item there are, whether the item is usable or not, and what the description for the item is, and what image to be displaying. So if I go back here, we need to have some way of sending information to the manager, and we also need to have some way of setting everything up so that we can set everything to what it's supposed to be. So I'm going to create a new method here, and I'm going to call this setup. And this needs to be public so it can be accessed from the inventory manager. So this is going to be a public void. We'll call it setup. And this is going to take a couple different arguments. It's going to need to know what item it should put. So we'll make that inventory. Oh, haha, this should be inventory manager, not inventory. Inventory item, we'll call it new item. And then we also need to know what the inventory manager is. So inventory manager, new manager. And then both of these will be set from the inventory manager itself. So in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this item. Nope, not this. This item is equal to new item. And then I'll also say this manager is equal to new manager. So this is going to know who the inventory manager is. Now, after we set it up, we're then going to have to make sure that we actually have an item here. And if we do, we'll have to assign the number text and then the image. So let's create, let's do that. Let's say if this item. And you could have it be if this item is not null, but if you just say if this item, it's only going to be true if it's not null anyway. I'm using a new keyboard because I'm in my office at home now and not in my classroom. It's really weird. Okay, so if this item, then what we want to do is we want to say item image sprite is equal to the item sprite, which I actually guess I don't need to have it as a variable there. I could just say this item dot. Did I call it item sprite? Item image. And then I can also say item number text dot text is equal to. Now this needs to be a string, so if I just put down a number, like say 5, Unity is going to have an issue with that because it needs to be a string, and you can't implicitly convert an integer to a string. So there's two options that we could go for with this. One, you can cast this to a string, so you can add string in front in parentheses like that. But apparently I can't cast it like that. I thought I could. The other way is to just do open close parentheses and then add a plus, and then that automatically makes this a string. So, all right, so what we're doing here is we're setting it up the slot. We're going to take in the item that this should be, the manager that this should have. We're going to set the item to the new item, the manager to the new item. And if the item isn't null, we're going to set the sprite, and we're going to set the text. And instead of being just +5, I'm going to do this item dot number held, which is how many of the item that we have. Which means I don't need to have, I probably don't even need to have that description there. Sometimes, so I am going from notes today. I know it probably feels like I'm not, but man, I probably didn't need to do that in my little prototype I made for this. Okay, so that's the setup method. Now, right now, setup is never going to get called, which is fine because the inventory manager is what's going to actually be setting that up. So I'm going to save all my scripts here really quickly. And what I want to do is I want to have a little method here that's going to send information to the manager. So the manager itself is going to have some information. The manager is going to need to know what the player's actual inventory is, and that's another script we haven't created yet. So I'll do that in a second. So we need to header, we'll call this inventory information. And then we're going to need to know what an actual inventory slot is, the prefab version. So let's make that. Let's make this a serialized field because it doesn't need to be public. Private game object. And we'll call this blank inventory slot. I have a tendency to use these super long variable names. A lot of other people, I'm sure, would write a shorter variable name for that. I also need to know what the parent is going to be. So that scroll view, the content area. So I'm going to create a reference to that as well. Serialized field. This is private game object. And I'm going to call this inventory panel. Okay. I need to know the description text. So serialized field, text, private, text mesh pro U GUI, and we'll call this description text. And then I need to know that use button. And I'm going to treat it just like a game object. I'm going to have it, we could make it so that it's not interactable, kind of like grayed out if you can't use it, but I think that it shouldn't even be there if it's an item that you can't use from the inventory, like a sword. So I'm going to make it a game object. Serialized field, private, game object, and we'll call this use button. All right, I'm going to save this information, and I'm going to go back into Unity and assign a few things, and then make sure everything's where it should be. So my inventory panel itself is what's going to get the inventory manager script as soon as everything's done compiling down there. Nope, didn't mean to do that. Inventory panel gets inventory manager. And this needs to know a few things. So first, if I go to my prefabs, inventory, I'm going to tell it what the blank inventory slot is. It needs to know what the inventory panel is, which is what I'm going to parent stuff to. It's bad naming. I should have called it inventory scroll view or something. So that needs to be the content portion of the scroll view. The description text is this text right here, and let me rename that so that I don't forget what it is. Description text. And then the use button is this button here, which I'm going to rename so I know what it is. So if I go back up to my inventory panel, it needs to know what the use button is. All right, so now there's a lot of communication in between these two. So what I want to do is I want to have a way to change the text and to make the button active or not. So I'm going to make a little method here. I'm just going to call this, we'll make this public, and we'll make it like set text and button. It's not a super imaginative name, but it's going to work. Now this is going to need to know what to set the description text to. So it's going to need a string, and I'm going to call this description. And it's going to need to have whether or not that button should be active. And this is going to be a bool, we'll say button active. So I want to take my description text, dot text, and this time I don't have to do the open close parentheses. I can just directly set it equal to the description, because the description has to be a string. Otherwise it won't be accepted by the method. And then I also want to say if button active, so if the Boolean value for button active is true, then I want to say use button dot set active true. Otherwise, use button dot set active false. So, all right, and then when we start, I'm going to call that set text and button, and I'm going to pass in an empty string and false. And what this should do is make it so that that description text goes away and the button becomes inactive. So let's save our scripts. Did I save them both? Yeah. Go back here. Let that think for a second. And then as soon as it's done thinking, we'll hit play. And we should see our item description and the use button go away. And there we go. So the item description and the use button are gone because it knew that it needed to do that right at the start. Now, what I want to do here is I'm going to create another little method. Actually, before I do that, I need to make another script. So I'm going to go to my inventory scripts. I'm going to create another script, C# script. And this is going to be a player inventory. Now the player inventory here is going to be super simple. It's just going to be a list of inventory objects or inventory items. And then this is also going to be a scriptable object so that we can have an instance of it. The reason I want to do this as a scriptable object is you might have a situation where you want your player to have a limited inventory, in which case you could have different inventory objects. You could have their regular inventory, but you might have a scene where you want the player's inventory to not be the regular one. Maybe it's an inventory that doesn't have a shield, like after they were attacked by a like or something like that. Or maybe it's a tutorial inventory. So this is going to inherit from scriptable object. And what this is going to do right now, do I need to do, no, I'm going to make this public list of, and I'm not going to do just generic scriptable objects. I'm going to do inventory items. And I want to call it, I don't know, my inventory is equal to a new list of inventory item. I think that's the right way to set that up. It's been a hot minute since I've used a list. So there we go. Now, just like with the inventory item, just to remind you guys, I use this create asset menu. I'm going to use this file name and menu name here. Actually, I'm just going to grab this whole line because I forgot to do the create asset menu. So I'm going to copy, and I'm going to go to the player inventory, and I'm going to paste that right there. This isn't going to be a new item. This is going to be new inventory, and this is going to be inventory slash player inventory. All right, so I'm going to save all my scripts. I'm going to pop back into Unity here, and I'm going to go to my scriptable objects as soon as everything's done loading. And I want to go to my inventory scriptable objects. There we go. Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is okay, cool. So I'm going to create inventory, player inventory, and I'm going to call it, let's maybe call it general player inventory. And right now it has nothing, so I'm going to make it have a size of 1. And that's going to be the soldier sword. Now the reason I'm using a list for this instead of an array is lists are much more flexible than arrays. Arrays kind of have their size, and once they have their size, that's it. That's as big as they are. Whereas lists can expand and shrink dynamically depending on what you need them to do. So we're going to have a player inventory that just has the soldier sword. Now, if I go back to my inventory manager here, I need to make a reference to that player inventory. So this is going to be a public, and we'll call this player inventory, and I'm just going to call it player inventory. And then when we start, I'm going to do another quick little method, which is just to create the blank inventory slots. So this is going to be void make inventory slots. And I'm going to check to see if player inventory isn't null. So if player inventory, so that I don't have a null reference exception error. And if there is a player inventory, then I want to do for. So I want to go over everything in the inventory and set up a slot for each inventory item. So to do that, I'm going to use a for loop. I'm going to start with some integer I equal to 0. I'm going to keep I less than player inventory dot. It's player inventory dot my inventory dot count, which is how many items are in the player's inventory. And then after I finish each one, I'm going to increase. It might be better to go backwards through this, but I think it's going to be simpler for most people to understand. Just in case what one of the things does is remove itself from the count. No, we'll leave it like this. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to create a new blank inventory slot. So I'm going to call this inventory slot. New slot is equal to instantiate blank inventory slot, and I want to instantiate it at, it doesn't matter where, transform dot position, transform dot rotation. So I'm creating it, and then I need to get the component from it that I need. So I'm just going to do this over multiple lines here so that it doesn't get too unwieldy. So dot get component inventory slot. Okay, so that's not only creating the item, but also assigning this temporary variable of new slot to be the inventory slot component of it. And the reason I want to do that is because I made this setup method an inventory slot specifically so that I can set it to be what it's supposed to be. Now I also want to make sure that this has the right parent. So I'm going to say new slot dot transform. Oops. I am misspelling stuff all over the place today. Yeah, set parent. I had it right. So I want to set its parent to be that scroll view item that I had up here, the inventory panel. So I'm going to say its parent is going to be the inventory panel dot transform. Okay, cool. Now the other thing I need to do is actually set it up. So I'm going to do new slot dot setup, and this needs to have an item. So the item is going to be whichever part of the player inventory I'm currently in. So I'm going to do player inventory I, and then it needs to know who the manager is, and that's going to be this. Oh, and it needs to be player inventory I. Oh, player inventory dot my inventory I. That's why. All right, so I'm going to save this. Now, this is a lot of back-end stuff today. Last time was a lot of front-end stuff, so hopefully this isn't going to be too bad. I'm going to go to my inventory panel, and did I not save? Public player inventory, save. Oh, there it is. So I'm just going to put my general player inventory in here. And if I didn't do anything wrong, this should have the sword on it. Okay, cool. Oh, ha! I did a couple things wrong. So first thing is I want to, in my start, make inventory slots. And then, yeah, let's try that now, so that we're actually calling the method that we just made. Let's see how this works. Okay, so we got a null reference exception error at line 38 in inventory manager. New slot.transform. That's set parent. Null reference exception error. Object not set to a reference of an object. Let's add a little check here then. So we're just going to add a quick check to see if new slot is null or not, so that we're only doing something with new slot if it exists. So we'll save that. Because I'm not sure which part it's telling me is the null reference error. Okay, so I'm still getting a null reference error. Oh, no, I'm not anymore. Okay, so in my player inventory, I've got my player sword. Do I have that assigned here? I do. So if player inventory. Okay, welcome back. So here's what I did wrong. Rather than setting this slot right away, because I don't really need to do that, I'm going to do a few things slightly differently. So rather than creating new slot, I'm just going to turn this into a temporary game object. So game object temp is equal to, and then I'll instantiate all this stuff. But I'm not going to get component. I'm also not going to put it at transform.position. I'm not sure why I did that. I want to put it at the inventory panel's position. So inventory panel dot transform dot position. And I also want to do it at quaternion.identity for the rotation, which shouldn't make a difference, but dot identity. But I'm going to do it there anyway. Take this down just so I can see everything. Now, I haven't assigned that new slot yet, so I'm going to say inventory slot new slot is equal to temp dot get component inventory slot. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm not sure why I was setting the parent in here. So I'm just going to cut that line from there, and I'm going to set the parent right after I instantiate it. So I'm just going to paste it there. All right, and instead of this being new slot, this is going to be for the temporary item. All right, cool. See, I even had notes about this, and this is so close to my original script that I guess my notes weren't detailed enough. So I'm just going to save this. So again, what this is doing is it's going over the player's inventory. It's checking all the items, and if the items exist, then it's going to create a slot for it. Now, this isn't going to quite work just yet. So, but just to show you it's going to work like 90% of the way. I'm going to jump in here, and we'll hit play as soon as it's done compiling. So there we go. So we don't have an actual sprite there, and we don't have it showing the correct number of items, but we do have that one item there, and our description text is gone, and the use button's gone. So let's make it so that it knows correctly what to do. So now if I go back into Unity here, I want to go to my prefabs, inventory slot. I'm going to open this prefab, and I forgot to give this the script for the inventory slot. So in my inventory scripts, I'm going to grab inventory slot. I'm just going to pull that right on here. Now this needs to know the item number text, which is the number held right here. It needs to know the image, which is this right here. And it doesn't know these variables just yet, but these are going to be set when it's created. So the inventory slot, when it's created, is going to know what item it should have and who the manager is. So let's save that. Let's go back into Unity, let's hit play. I don't think I actually put an image for the sword, so I think that image is still going to be blank. No, I did. I used the arrow. Okay, cool. So we'll work on getting this to communicate with the manager next time, where when you press the button, the description comes up, and if it's usable, it says usable. But yeah, so far that's pretty good. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. Honestly, the best place to ask me questions is going to be on my Discord server. If I'm not there, there's plenty of super awesome people there who are always willing to help. It's a really positive, really constructive place, especially in the internet. If you have any questions, or you can follow my Twitter to find out when I post new videos. You can, I have a Patreon. As little as $1 a month helps me keep making content like this. And yeah, I hope everybody out there has themselves a wonderful day.